the city of bridges and of champions.
Rear takes the handoff, drives over the middle to the one.
Forged by helping shape America over the past 250 years.
A lot of people don't think of Pittsburgh as a hub of the Revolution, but it definitely was.
From the Revolutionary War and exploration to the booming steel industry that built the nation.
The steel that came out of this region allows for the opening of the world.
Pittsburgh, now a hub of innovation moving America forward with life-saving medicine.
I think he saved a generation of children.
And so many other inventions.
All right, step one, we're gonna cut the banana.
That are part of everyday life. Over the next hour, we celebrate Pittsburgh's past and look to its future.
How are you? Nice to see you.
This is Celebrating America, Pittsburgh Proud. Here are Channel 11 anchors Gordon Lesh and Lisa Sylvester.
And we thank you for joining us, and happy 250th birthday, America. It is the perfect time to look back on the moments and places around Pittsburgh that helped shape this nation.
Here in the city, that history isn't just remembered, some of it is still standing. From a fortress at the forks of the Three Rivers to the men who fought and bled on this ground, Pittsburgh's story is America's story. Long before Pittsburgh was a steel town, it was a battleground, the most strategically important piece of land in North America. The confluence of the Allegheny, Monongahela, and Ohio rivers made this spot the key to an entire continent. European empires knew it, Native peoples knew it, and a young Virginia soldier named George Washington knew it too.
When young George Washington arrived at the forks of the Ohio, that's what they called the confluence of the rivers in 1753, he got to the point and he said, somebody needs to build a fort here because whoever does controls the western rivers, the gateway to the west.
But the French had beaten Washington to the point, building their own fort, Fort Duquesne, in 1754. When General Forbes' army came marching through the Pennsylvania wilderness 4 years later, the French didn't wait to fight, they burned it to the ground and fled. On the ashes of Fort Duquesne, the British built something far more formidable. Fort Pitt was at the time one of the largest and most elaborate fortifications in all of North America. And Mike Burke, assistant director at the Fort Pitt Museum, says its role in the American Revolution is one of Pittsburgh's most overlooked stories.
A lot of people don't think of Pittsburgh as a hub of the Revolution, but it definitely was. From 1777 onward, it was the headquarters of the Continental Army in the West.
The fort's role extended far beyond military conquest. In 1778, right here at the point, the United States signed its very first peace treaty with Native American nations, the Delaware people. Before the Constitution was written, before the Bill of Rights was conceived, this ground was already the site of the young nation's first attempt at diplomacy with the people it was displacing.
So there are Shawnee people, there are Delaware people, there are Iroquoian people from all of the Six Nations. So there are Senecas, Cayugas, Mohawks. There are also Wyandot people.
Other names of that era are written all over this area. Braddock, where the highest-ranking British officer ever to come to North America was defeated and killed. Grant Street, named for the general whose army was annihilated trying to take Fort Duquesne. There's Forbes Avenue, Mount Washington, and Stanwyck Street.
Driving through the city of Pittsburgh is kind of a tour of history in itself. We see names every day that we don't connect with the people that existed in the past.
And one of those names, Neville, lived just south of the city at Woodville Plantation, the oldest house in western Pennsylvania open for public tours. Rob Windhorst is the historian there.
John Neville is appointed as the commander at Fort Pitt on behalf of Lord Dunmore, which is really interesting because very shortly after he is appointed commander by Dunmore, the American Revolution breaks out. And Neville now is out on the western frontier as commander of this very large, formerly British fort, and he now throws in his lot with the American cause.
A fortress that had taken years to build and altered the course of a continent stood for barely 35 years before Pittsburghers tore it down. Focused not on the past, but on the future.
After the Revolution, it served its purpose. People in Pittsburgh start to dismantle it, and they use it to build the foundations of many of the buildings that are the oldest in the city today.
The blockhouse still stands at Point State Park, the last surviving remnant of Fort Pitt, a 2.5-century-old witness to the birth of a nation. The new American government had barely found its footing when it faced its first armed insurrection, not from a foreign power, but from its own citizens right here in western Pennsylvania. The Whiskey Rebellion of 1794 wasn't just a tax dispute, it was a secessionist crisis that threatened to break the young republic in two. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton imposed the new nation's first domestic tax on American citizens, an excise on whiskey. Not a tariff on foreign goods, a tax on something produced right here by farmers who had just fought a revolution partly over taxation. For Western Pennsylvanians, Scots-Irish settlers, it wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an attack on their survival.
The farmers in Western Pennsylvania really depended on rye and wheat and other grains. That was their cash crop. But they couldn't store it, they couldn't ship it. It was too expensive to ship over the Allegheny Mountains or all the way to New Orleans down the rivers. So they had to convert it to whiskey. They distilled it, and that whiskey became their cash crop.
The militia that would ignite open rebellion gathered at a small log Presbyterian meeting house on Mingo Church Road just south of Pittsburgh. Still standing today is a brick church built in 1831 on the same ground. It was here that the Mingo militia gathered, organized, and marched out to confront the federal government. The men who met inside those walls are buried just steps away in the adjacent cemetery. Among them is Captain James McFarland, a Revolutionary War veteran who survived the British only to fall at Bower Hill. His tombstone still stands in the Mingo Creek churchyard. The epitaph reads, "He fell at last by the hands of an unprincipled villain." The villain, historians believe, was John Neville himself.
Needless to say, doesn't sit well with the rest of the farmers in the area. The next day, all of the local militias form, march out, and it wasn't rabble, it was full military processions led by former commanders from the American Revolution. They march out, surround Bower Hill. John Neville at that point has left. He knew it wasn't going to end well for him. He left behind his one of his very close friends, Abraham Kirkpatrick, to defend the house along with 12 U.S. soldiers from Fort Fayette in Pittsburgh. They were able to defend the house for several hours until finally the roughly 500 to 700 farmers, after their leader is shot and killed, burn the house and the property to the ground.
The burning of Bower Hill in what is now Scott Township was the spark that lit a much larger fire. Similar revolts against the whiskey tax broke out across the backcountry regions of Maryland, Kentucky, Virginia, and the Carolinas. This was not just a Pittsburgh story, it was a national crisis. Here in western Pennsylvania, thousands of armed farmers mustered at Braddock's Field in what is now North Braddock and marched on Pittsburgh. Men who had fought in the Revolution and now turned their weapons towards their own government.
It really should be remembered as one of the most important crises we ever faced, because had it succeeded, it could have unraveled the entire republic. The Whiskey Rebellion will turn into a secessionist movement.
President George Washington's response was unprecedented, and it was personal. With the French Revolution unfolding across the Atlantic as a warning of what rebellion could become, he acted decisively.
George Washington is actually the only president who took the field with an army and marched toward Pittsburgh. He personally made it as far as Bedford, but Hamilton and Morgan and Light Horse Harry Lee, the great generals of the Revolution, they came to Pittsburgh and they quashed the rebellion.
150 men were arrested, 20 were convicted of treason, but only 2 were sentenced to hang, and Washington pardoned them both. The whiskey tax was eventually repealed, impossible to collect. Historians have long argued that in the end, the rebels may have won the larger argument. 9 years after the Whiskey Rebellion, Pittsburgh again found itself at the center of American history, this time as the launching point for the greatest expedition this country has ever known. The Lewis and Clark journey is remembered in St. Louis. It's celebrated in the West, but it began right here. The Lewis and Clark journey is remembered in St. Louis and celebrated across the West, but it began right here. President Thomas Jefferson had long dreamed of exploring the continent's interior. When Napoleon unexpectedly offered to sell 828,000 square miles of uncharted territory in the spring of 1803, Jefferson's dream became an urgent reality. The land was so unknown that Jefferson believed it might still contain mastodons and possibly the lost tribes of Israel. He needed someone to go find out what was out there, and he turned to a young Army officer, Meriwether Lewis, who he knew well. Lewis was the Army's paymaster at Fort Fayette, right here in Pittsburgh.
Jefferson and Meriwether Lewis hatched this scheme for a transcontinental exploration, and it was to start right here in Pittsburgh, the place where everyone would start a Western journey, the gateway to the West.
Pittsburgh wasn't just the starting point, it was the reason the expedition was even possible. Lewis needed men who already knew how to survive in the wilderness. He also found something else here, his dog, a Newfoundland, who would travel the entire 8,000 miles with the Corps of Discovery. Historian Brady Kritzer calls him a Pittsburgh dog.
If you want to live on the frontier, which Pittsburgh very much was in 1803, you had to be tough. You needed to know how to supply your own food, how to hunt, how to fish, how to deal diplomatically with native nations. These are all essential skills that Lewis and Clark will need in the years ahead as they push toward the Pacific Ocean.
Lewis spent weeks in Pittsburgh waiting on a chronically delayed boat builder before finally departing on August 31st, 1803 in a 55-foot keelboat built at the U.S. Wharf, right where the convention center stands today. He left with just 11 men. His first stop was Bruno's Island, just 2.5 miles downriver, where Pittsburgh's mayor and dignitaries had gathered to see them off. Lewis decided to demonstrate his remarkable air rifle.
He put a mark on a tree, shot 7 times, hit the mark dead center. One of the guys in the audience said, "That's amazing. Let me try that." And he yanked the gun out of Lewis's hand. It went off and it hit a woman in the head 15 paces away. Lewis was beside himself. First day of the expedition, and he's already killed the mayor's wife. They got her back on her feet. She was alive, a little wobbly, but he said, "Boys, get back on the boat. Let's get out of here."
Today, the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail officially begins in Pittsburgh.
David McCullough, America's favorite historian and a native Pittsburgher, would often say that Pittsburgh is the essential American city. If you can understand Pittsburgh, you can understand the American experience.
250 years in, Pittsburgh's place in the American story is undeniable. From the fortress that opened a continent, to the rebellion that tested a government, to the expedition that mapped a nation. It all started here at the forks of the Ohio.
What an incredible history. And yes, Washington County is named for George Washington. The county was established in 1781 and was the first in the U.S. to bear Washington's name. He owned nearly 3,000 acres along Miller's Run, and by the end of that century, he had leased or sold the parcels. It remains mostly farmland today. And just south of there, you'll find Washington and Jefferson College, named after the first president. The Pennsylvania General Assembly granted Washington Academy its charter back in 1787. It then merged with rival Jefferson College in 1865.
Still to come from George Washington's men, Amelia Earhart, and oil drilling. We'll take you to Butler County to show you the impact that area had in forming the nation. Plus,
my father brought the vaccine home, sterilized the needles and syringes on the stove, and then proceeded to put us through what we hated as kids, getting needles stuck into us.
The polio vaccine, just one of several medical breakthroughs that happened right here. And
the Steel City, the moment Pittsburgh got that nickname, and the rise and fall of the steel industry through the years. That's next. The Lemoyne House in Washington is Pennsylvania's first National Historic Landmark of the Underground Railroad. Dr. Francis Julius Lemoyne risked arrest or more to provide a safe haven for slaves seeking freedom. Another stop on the Underground Railroad was the Bingham House in Mount Washington. It was built in 1849, and abolitionist attorney Thomas James Bingham lived there. You'll also find markers throughout downtown Pittsburgh and Market Square noting Underground Railroad spots.
And then just about 3 years ago, crews from the Merrick Art Gallery Museum in New Brighton in Beaver County discovered an abandoned tunnel on their property, and they believe that it is part of the Underground Railroad. The project to unearth the entire tunnel is still underway. And less than a year after the revolution, Pittsburgh got the new nickname, the Steel City.
It happened when Andrew Carnegie brought big steel-making processes to our area. Channel 11's Rich Pierce took a look at the history of steel here and how it helped build America.
This is America.
America, forged in the ovens and furnaces of western Pennsylvania. Steel production, as we know it, was born in Braddock in 1875 in the form of Andrew Carnegie's Edgar Thomson plant.
That's when you see for the first time steel being made not by the pound, but by the ton.
Business boomed and competition sprang up.
The wealth that was accumulated in this region was only surpassed by New York and London. There was more capital here in the early 20th century than anywhere else.
Mass-produced steel became a hallmark of America's second industrial revolution and was used in everything from train tracks to skyscrapers.
The steel from this region allows for the opening of the world.
Ron Bariff is the VP of Historic Resources and Facilities at Rivers of Steel. The organization has been around for more than 3 decades and focuses on education and preservation of steel sites. He says major investments in our region's steel manufacturing were made during and just after World War II.
The moniker of Arsenal of Democracy has been applied to Pittsburgh, and it's not hyperbole. It's absolute truth. The steel that came out of this region won the war.
And production hit its peak in the late 40s and 50s.
That's when you see plants such as this, the Homestead Works, employing 15,000 people. J&L Pittsburgh's 14,000 people. J&L Aliquippa's 17,000 people.
A decade later, things started to change.
I could be unloading a truck one day or digging a ditch another day.
That's about the time Keith Klaus, known by his fellow steelworkers as Choo Choo, signed on as a laborer at the Edgar Thomson plant.
I had come straight out of the Army and right into the mill, so the camaraderie was very, very similar. You hard to have a lot of faith in the guys you work with.
Klaus told Channel 11 he loved his time in the mill, but it was dangerous work.
I saw one guy get pretty well burned, and I saw another guy get cut up really bad by a piece of flying metal.
He worked at the plant from 1968 to 1972 and told us veteran workers warned him right from the start that change was coming.
Some of the older guys said, "You better get out of here. This isn't lasting. They're not sticking money back in here."
It was that lack of reinvestment, plus changing environmental laws, new technology, labor issues, and foreign competition that Bariff says created a perfect storm. By the mid-'80s, more than 150,000 jobs were lost and communities decimated.
To the public and even to the people working in these plants, it felt like it was happening all at once.
Devastating. Absolutely devastating. I watched my neighborhood, I watched my community, I watched my city wither.
4 decades later, Pittsburgh is an example of resilience, surviving and thriving in industries like tech, medicine, and education.
When manufacturing industry, steel industry went down, that was able to step into the void.
And steel is still here, just not on the same scale. New technology allows hundreds to do the jobs of thousands. But the legacy of those early years lives on in our institutions.
What was left behind by people like Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick with Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh helped to diversify what was happening here.
When you look around our region, the parks, the museums, the landscapes were the result of the robber barons.
And in our people.
I got to admit that I'm still surprised and proud of how the city bounced back. And where we were down on our knees and just got up and made it into a hell of a place to live.
This is who we are. It's not just who we were, it's who we are. It defined this region. This industry created that sense of Pittsburgh, that strength that we have.
Rich Pierce, Channel 11 News. Pittsburgh Steel Strong. That hard work, blue-collar mentality extended well beyond the city of Pittsburgh city limits.
From the Revolution to aviation, what's now Butler County was a key area in the transformation of the nation. Channel 11's Andrew Havranek takes us to all the rich history around Butler County.
This painting of General Richard Butler is right by the courthouse on Main Street. He and his brothers were some of George Washington's most trusted soldiers.
Washington once said, "When I want something done, I ask a butler to do it."
Two brothers who fought alongside Butler owned a mill near the current Butler County Courthouse and donated land for this area to be the county seat.
The title of our town originally was Tressler, but to honor their commanding officer, they named it Butler after General Richard Butler, who was killed there on November 4th, 1791.
This is that land those brothers donated. Then presidential candidate John F. Kennedy spoke right at the corner here in October 1960. Marquis de Lafayette, a general during the American Revolution, dined at a building where the Lafayette Apartments now stand at a place called the Mansion House in 1825.
He came out from that dinner and shook hands with 400 veterans of the American Revolution who had come from all over the parts of Butler County to shake the general's hand.
U.S. Senator Walter Lowry lived in this house behind the courthouse. The only U.S. Senator from Butler, Lowry was critical in helping free Frederick Douglass, who was one of the most important leaders of the movement to end slavery. After Douglass escaped to England, Lowry negotiated his freedom for $711.
Frederick Douglass then was granted those papers signed by his owner. He took the boats across the ocean, and when he arrived at the port in New York City, Walter Lowry handed him his freedom papers.
On the side of Lowry's home is a mural honoring Uncle Billy William Smith. In Titusville, he drilled the very first oil well.
The most important resource in the world to this day remains oil, as world events right now clearly demonstrate. And Uncle Billy was the first man to drill a well like that.
Another mural inside the courthouse shows an event near present-day Evans City. George Washington was nearly assassinated by a Native American working with the French. The shot missed and Washington escaped.
That shot will represent the beginning of what becomes a global conflict, the war for empire between France and Britain. That war ends in 1753. It was known here as the French and Indian War. And that's going to be a total British victory.
There's even more recent historical ties. These are colorized photos of Amelia Earhart. She spent months getting her instrument training at the Butler-Pittsburgh Airport before her solo flight across the Atlantic.
The plane was also outfitted with the fuel tanks that carried it across the ocean at that airport. That hangar is still there.
It's all part of Butler County's story, which has shaped America into the nation it is 250 years later. In Butler, Andrew Havranek, Channel 11 News.
Thanks, Andrew. Still to come, so many inventions, at least one straight from Butler County, got their start in Western PA. We go down the long list of items we can claim. Plus,
Lead passes to Greer, and it's complete for a gain of 5.
You can't talk about Pittsburgh's legacy without talking sports. The long list of sports firsts that happened right here.
And she's Western Pennsylvanians Betsy Ross, the woman behind this revolutionary flag all over Westmoreland County, and the meaning behind it. That's next. Now heading to Westmoreland County, where a woman stitched a flag that symbolized independence during the Revolution. You'll see the flag displayed all over the county to this day. Channel 11's Addison Albert introduces you to Elizabeth Craig and what led to her creation.
And when you research women during that time frame, they work up in the shadows. We always hear about Betsy Ross, but we never heard about Elizabeth Craig from Westmoreland County.
The rattlesnake flag seen in several parts of the county was created by a 17-year-old girl named Elizabeth Craig. The flag was first displayed in the fall of 1775 during the American Revolution. The flag shows a rattlesnake hissing at the British Union Jack, with a tail showing 13 rings, symbolizing the 13 colonies, independent from the crown. The JP at the top of the flag represents John Proctor, who led the 1st Battalion from Hannistown in Westmoreland County to the war. But the flag's history is linked more to the man who carried it onto the battlefield.
She made that for her father, Samuel Craig Sr., who was proudly held that flag into battle. He had 3 sons, so the Craigs were a group that protected that flag.
Watt is a direct descendant of the Craig family, who was originally from New Alexandria, Westmoreland County. He says his family's flag is the last rattlesnake flag still in existence from the American Revolution.
You go back into time and you're like, wow, you know, my family wasn't just there, they played a part in it. They participated in the American Revolution. They made the flag. They carried the flag.
It is unclear when the flag was officially adopted by the county, but it now flies proudly in front of the courthouse. After the American Revolution, John Proctor became the first sheriff for the county. In 2020, James Albert took over as sheriff. He's from the same small town as Elizabeth Craig, so he decided to incorporate the flag into the department's logo.
It has a lot of history, so a lot of times patches are designed with something new. I like the old idea.
John Proctor eventually returned the flag to the Craig family after the war, and they preserved it for over 104 years before eventually gifting it to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. Addison Albert, Channel 11 News.
Have you ever just looked up at some of the amazing architecture in Pittsburgh? The world-renowned architects who designed some of the most iconic buildings and the inspiration behind them. Plus,
It's a big seller for us. We probably go through, honestly, 200 pounds of bananas a week.
Can you guess what we're making? The many food and fun inventions created right here in Western Pennsylvania.
and the medical breakthroughs started here that are still changing lives all across America. That story when Celebrating America, Pittsburgh Proud returns. Welcome back. This is Freedom House Ambulance Service, the first ambulance service in the nation. It began in the Hill District in 1967, run by 47 black women and men serving the Hill and Oakland. All were trained in advanced life support. The Freedom House model is what led to the ambulance services we see now across the U.S. And that's just one of the many medical advancements that started right here. Another one is the polio vaccine, which saved thousands of lives.
University of Pittsburgh's Dr. Jonas Salk created it and started distributing it in 1955. Channel 11's Jennifer Tomazik talked with Salk's family and those who were among the first to get the vaccine.
Polio in the early 50s.
People would keep their kids inside. They would not let them go to swimming pools.
Epidemics were reported in the summertime.
It was just every parent's worst nightmare.
The very contagious virus could lead to paralysis. Some with breathing issues were put in an iron lung like this. But enter Dr. Jonas Salk and his team, and the world-changing polio vaccine developed right here in Pittsburgh.
Was tapped on the shoulder by the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which had been formed by FDR, who had polio himself.
Dr. Jonas Salk's son, Dr. Peter Salk, was a child when his dad started working on the vaccine at the University of Pittsburgh. He was part of one of the first groups of kids to get the vaccine his dad was testing.
My father brought the vaccine home, sterilized the needles and syringes on the stove, and then proceeded to put us through what we hated as kids, getting needles stuck into us.
Tingle Barnes was part of the trial too.
We were all put into this group that would go to the D.T. Watson home.
She shared a story about her brother who picked up something and wasn't getting better. They'd gone to Dr. Jonas Salk at the recommendation of their pediatrician.
And what he realized was Dick had been infected, but because he'd had the vaccines, it had protected him against the worst of polio. Because of you, I was able to tell that the vaccines were working.
The polio vaccine trial expanded to 7,500 Pittsburgh school children and then to a national trial of 1.8 million kids. By 1955, Salk's polio vaccine was declared safe and effective.
That just created such a wave of relief around the country.
I think he saved a generation of children. I mean, you can't say enough about that, whether it's Pittsburghers or across the nation.
The whole community got behind this. They saw this as an opportunity to help move a way to prevent polio forward.
Jonas Salk's polio vaccine is still used to vaccinate babies today. Dr. Don Burke, a dean emeritus at Pitt, has been keeping Salk's accomplishments at the forefront. He's helped to curate this exhibit at the School of Public Health at Pitt. Salk's family donated what you see here, as they also want his legacy in Pittsburgh and across the world to be remembered.
To continue to expand what my father wanted to see in terms of making the best use we can of the resources at our disposal as humans to shape a better future.
Jennifer Tomazik, Channel 11 News.
And the medical advancements don't stop there. Pitt's Dr. Thomas Starzl performed the world's first successful liver transplant in 1963. He then pioneered the immunosuppressive drugs for transplantees. Along with Freedom House Ambulance, Dr. Peter Safer also pioneered the modern-day CPR method. And finally, Mr. Yuck at the Poison Control Center at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh created the not so friendly face to put on hazardous and toxic household items to warn kids to stay away.
Turning now to the great architecture we have in our area. As the nation hit the 19th century, some of the world's most well-known architects were designing many of the skyscrapers around the city. Channel 11 News anchor Liz Kilmer shows us the history behind some of our most iconic buildings.
On our nation's birthday, the historic Coppers building here will be one of many buildings in Pittsburgh and across the nation lit up in red, white, and blue, appropriate as so many of our buildings are rich in American history.
Pittsburgh has one of the best collections of old skyscrapers, beautiful landmarks like this one.
High praise from an expert. Mark Hauser is an author, speaker, and founder of Skyscraper Stories, where he's hosted thousands of people for tours on this balcony at the iconic Coppers building in downtown Pittsburgh, sharing the rich history of our magnificent buildings.
This building was, for a short time, the tallest building in Pittsburgh, and then the Gulf building passed it up.
Both commissioned by Andrew Mellon. Art Deco skyscrapers popular of the 1920s, the same era when the Grand Cathedral of Learning was built too. So many of Pittsburgh's skyscrapers developed by prestigious, famous architects of the era.
Prior to that, around the turn of the century, the style was known as Beaux-Arts, which is a term French for fine arts, because that style came out of the School of Fine Arts in Paris.
That style pioneered by the famous Daniel Burnham of Chicago, responsible for many of our most iconic structures, the Pennsylvanian and the Frick.
So he did more buildings here in Pittsburgh than any other city outside Chicago, which just talks about how wealthy and powerful our steel barons were, that they could order up all these skyscrapers.
And with Pittsburgh steel, of course, encasing a lot of splendor. Mark also taking us inside the Coppers building.
This is one of the loveliest lobbies of a skyscraper in Pittsburgh, maybe anywhere. And it's this original marble, the Art Deco decorations. I start all of my skyscraper tours right here in this lobby.
And that lobby just so happens to be home to the National Flag Foundation, honoring great American heritage. And as we approach the 250th birthday, the foundation is leading a nationwide effort to have buildings and landmarks lit up in red, white, and blue. Coppers will be among those in Pittsburgh, shining bright in patriotism, reminding us of our storied history and our hopes for the future.
When we talk about these old skyscrapers, we're also talking about the entrepreneurs who built the fortunes that made Pittsburgh and that made them able to create these legacies. And they help us think about what legacies we can create for ourselves too.
And if you'd like to attend one of Mark's skyscraper tours, we'll have information for you posted to WPXI.com. In Pittsburgh, I'm Liz Kilmer, Channel 11 News.
And still to come, so we know how Pittsburgh contributed to the last 250 years, but what about the next? We walk the streets with city leaders to find out. Plus,
and said, we can't call this place Duquesne. That sounds way too French.
How Pittsburgh's streets got named. We drove around town to find out the history behind most of the streets you drive every day. And
the first Jeep ever built was built here in Western PA. The very long list of other firsts that were invented and started right here in our backyard.
right, step one, we're gonna cut the banana.
The key to making a great banana split. The popular dessert was invented in Latrobe in 1904. The cost just 10 cents and the perfect dessert after French fries and Heinz ketchup. Pittsburgh's favorite condiment first hit the shelves in 1876, and 90 years later it became a constant on the Big Mac, which was invented in Uniontown. All great treats after a ride on a Ferris wheel invented by a Pittsburgher and debuted at an exhibition in Chicago in 1893. But we're not done. Western PA also opened the first movie theater in 1905, the Nickelodeon on Smithville Street downtown. The first drive-in gas station opened in East Liberty in 1913. In 1920, KDKA Radio was the first station to ever hit the air. And just 2 years later, Isley Dairy in Ohio created the Klondike Bar. But the dessert became famous when they put them in Isley stores in Pittsburgh. And finally, we can claim bingo. The creator modeled it after a game he saw in Pittsburgh called Beano. He and a local Catholic priest then created what is modern-day bingo.
And last but not least, did you know the Jeep was born in Butler County? That invention dates back to the 1940s and is considered by some to be the greatest contribution to American warfare. Channel 11's Jatera McGee sat down with a man known as the Bantam Jeep historian who took her for a spin.
Fire up the engine, and a few seconds later, we've arrived at Bill Ringeisen's happy place. Driving a Jeep along an open country road is his version of heaven on earth. On a perfect sunny day, we're along for the ride in his World War II era 1942 Ford GPW.
3 generations that redid it, my dad, my brother, and my son.
The Jeep enthusiast has been feeding his obsession for decades, with the souvenirs to prove it.
Where's that red one at? That's a this is has some metal wheels on it.
A room absolutely bursting at the seams with Jeep merch and mementos, and
a few, too many.
Plenty of the real thing parked outside.
I got the 42 GPW, which Ford built. I got a 51 M38, which Korean War. And then I'm redoing a 45 MB.
Bill's passion for Jeeps is deep-rooted. It's about family, country, and hometown pride.
There's a lot of people that don't know that the Jeep was invented in Butler.
The year was 1940. The United States Army was searching for a motorized vehicle to replace the horse and put out a request for proposals to 135 automakers.
They had 49 days to build it, design it, build it, and deliver it in 49 days.
The big car companies didn't bite, but a tiny one out of Butler, Pennsylvania worked day and night, unknowingly riding into the history books.
Only one come with a prototype, was Bantam.
The American Bantam Car Company produced a vehicle small and lightweight, but tough enough to haul soldiers and heavy artillery. The company was awarded a contract for 70 vehicles. As for the impact, here's General George C. Marshall's famous take.
The greatest contribution to American warfare.
The evolution of the Jeep over the last 80-plus years is celebrated at the Bantam Jeep Heritage Festival.
We hold the record for the largest Jeep parade, 2,400 and some Jeeps for the record, and we evade the city of Butler.
They've broken the record twice. Of course, Ringeisen has a plaque, the perfect way to close a history lesson this Jeep historian is proud to share.
I want to keep the history rolling on it.
Jatera McGee, Channel 11 News.
Well, here's one you probably don't know. You know how when you type a colon and a right parentheses and it turns into a smiley face emoticon?
Well, a Carnegie Mellon computer scientist, Scott Fahlman, created that in 1982. He used it on a digital bulletin board to signify a joke he had written. And we can't forget the Pittsburgh inventions that may not be a nationwide thing, but they are so important to us.
The cookie table is about the blue-collar immigrants. That's who started the tradition.
Pittsburgh loves a great cookie table. The tradition is seen as sort of a wedding gift, building community from scratch. And you have Permanis. The sandwich, fries, and coleslaw concept started in the 1930s when Joe Permani was feeding truck drivers at the city's produce yards. He put everything on the sandwich to save the drivers time and then to let them eat with one hand.
Sports is in Pittsburgh's DNA, and it's always been that way, blazing trails and making history.
He had to stand up against a world of a country of prejudice and bigotry.
The long lists of firsts in sports that all happened right here in the City of Champions.
And Pittsburgh moving forward, what's next for the city and why the mayor thinks potholes won't be a problem.
Plus street names you've known all your life, but where did those names come from? We take you on a tour around Pittsburgh to find out. There is so much history behind so many things in Pittsburgh, like street names.
Fort Duquesne Boulevard, Stanwix, and Grant Streets, all names deeply rooted in American history. Channel 11 anchor Susan Copen rode around town in search of the meaning behind the names of the streets we use every day.
Who better than to have Andy Masick from the Heinz History Center to join us for our driving history tour of Pittsburgh.
It'll be a romp through 250 years of Pittsburgh history. I'm ready to go.
I'm dressed in my red, white, and blue. Let's do it.
Just make a U-turn right here.
Okay, let's go for it. Our trip will take us on a loop from the Strip District to downtown, up to Oakland, over to Lawrenceville, and then back to the History Center.
We're in the Strip District, which is the strip of land at the base of the Hill District. The hill is Grant's Hill. James Grant was a British officer who was captured during the French and Indian War as the British tried to take Fort Duquesne. And of course, now we're on Fort Duquesne Boulevard.
Fort Duquesne, established by the French in 1754, sat right at the spot we call the Point. And Grant Street downtown was named for that British officer, James Grant. Just one problem. And he hated Americans.
Yep, and fought against America during the American Revolution.
He would remain the namesake until 2015, when Pittsburgh City Council adopted a proclamation dedicating Grant Street.
And all in favor? Aye. This motion passes.
To the memory of President Ulysses S. Grant. So go.
You're going to turn left.
Right? As we make our way onto Stanwix Street, named for British General John Stanwix, who led the construction of Fort Pitt.
There's Mount Washington.
Mount Washington comes into view. Is Mount Washington really named after Washington?
Mount Washington is named for George Washington, but it wasn't named until the 1880s. Before that time, they called it Coal Hill. But the city fathers thought, ooh, that's not a very pretty name for such a beautiful geographic feature. Why don't we name it after Washington?
Leaving downtown and heading into Oakland, we take a left on Halkett Street. When I think Halkett, I think of McGee Women's Hospital. But Halkett, tell us about Halkett.
250 years ago, Sir Peter Halkett was a major in the British Army. He was killed at the Battle of the Monongahela, or Braddock's defeat.
From Halkett, we're about to turn right on Forbes. Tell us the significance of Forbes.
General John Forbes is the person who named Pittsburgh and said, we can't call this place Duquesne. That sounds way too French. How about Pittsburgh? We'll name it for William Pitt the Elder, the British Secretary of State. Forbes was a Scotsman. He grew up near Edinburgh, Scotland, and so this is a Scottish borough, not a German burg.
Give yourself a hand if you knew that piece of trivia. Bonus points if you knew Bouquet Street in Oakland is named after Henri Bouquet, a Swiss mercenary who served in the British Army. Now, off to Lawrenceville and a trip down Penn Avenue. It used to be called the Great Road.
Yeah. Penn Avenue was the main way people came into Pittsburgh historically. When General Forbes and Washington came in 1758, they would have come down Penn Avenue.
As for the name Lawrenceville, it's named after Captain James Lawrence,
who was the captain of the USS Chesapeake, which was blasted during the War of 1812. But Lawrence's last dying words were, "Don't give up the ship,"
which remains a Navy slogan and rally cry to this day. And it wouldn't be a true tour of Pittsburgh if we didn't end our trip with some unique Pittsburgh driving maneuvers.
I think you can do this.
Okay.
These are Pittsburgh rules. You're kind of weaving your way through bicycle lanes and parked cars.
I promise I'll be safe here. Sorry, biker. We have a truck blocking us. We're in the bike lane.
We haven't injured anyone important on this whole drive.
But we did learn about some very important and historical people who helped shape Pittsburgh as we know it. Susan Copen, Channel 11 News.
Well, you can't talk about how Pittsburgh shaped the nation without bringing up sports. To date, Forbes lists Pittsburgh very high on the list of sports-crazed cities.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense. Sports is part of Western Pennsylvania's DNA. Channel 11's Shelby Cassesi looked at how Pittsburgh helped shape sports into what it is today.
People forget that at the turn of the 20th century, Pittsburgh was one of the 10 largest cities in America. It was one of the wealthiest cities in America. So it became really integral to the beginnings and the growth of so many professional sports.
Before the NFL became a multi-billion-dollar business, one of its first defining moments happened here. In 1892, Pudge Heffelfinger received $500 to play for the Allegheny Athletic Association, considered to be the birth of professional football. Less than 50 years later, Pittsburgh helped shape a young NFL. At a 1935 meeting inside the Fort Pitt Hotel, league owners approved a new way to acquire talent, a draft.
And from that comes the whole system that's in use today. You know, last picks first and so on down to try and build a sustainability and provide kind of an economic bedrock for the National Football League.
Pittsburgh has long been front and center for groundbreaking moments across sports. The Pirates and the Boston Americans battled in the first World Series in 1903. Historic radio station KDKA aired the first live broadcast of a sporting event, a boxing match. A Pirates-Phillies game was the first baseball game to be broadcast live. Pitt WVU, the first college football game. The Panthers also appeared in the first nationally televised college basketball game and were one of the first to wear numbered jerseys. Sam Shulo Jr. is a Panthers sports historian and author.
The fact that KDKA was the first station, so it was a perfect marriage at that time because of how Pittsburgh was growing at that time, a lot of the immigrants coming into the city. Everything came together to make that happen.
But some of Pittsburgh's most important contributions broke barriers. The Cooper Fieldhouse here on Duquesne University's campus symbolizes that, named for the first black man drafted to the NBA.
I just wonder, like, mentally, you know, how tough that was. So when you talk about courage, they really had to have a lot of courage to blaze that trail.
And Cooper is far from the only example.
Greer takes the handoff, drives over the middle to the one before...
He had to stand up against a world of a country of prejudice and bigotry, but took it all in stride.
Pitt's Bobby Greer helped change college football history. He desegregated the Sugar Bowl in 1956. Despite intense outside pushback, Greer had the support of his teammates and even players on opposing Georgia Tech.
Oh yes, I'm very proud of what I did.
Channel 11 interviewed Greer in 2023.
Once the game started, everything just football.
Finally, he passes to Greer, and it's complete for a gain of 5.
That was it.
But it was so much more, as was the city's role in growing the Negro Leagues. Pittsburgh was the only town home to 2 teams. Players like Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige shined for the Homestead Grays and Pittsburgh Crawfords. Now, their families help keep that memory alive.
For us to continue that legacy through our family and through our foundation, it's very important to us to make sure that people don't forget these guys.
From the Trailblazers, whose impact reached far beyond sports, to the signature moments between the lines, Pittsburgh's teams and athletes have always changed the game.
And it's because this means something about who we are as a people, about who we are as a community, about who we are as neighbors. And it's something that in difficult times we can share and we can tell a positive story about ourselves and project that out to the nation.
I'm Shelby Cassesi, Channel 11 News.
Pittsburgh's far from done in helping the country move forward.
The whole world's looking at Pittsburgh after the NFL draft.
We hit the streets with Mayor Corey O'Connor to talk about the city's role in the future of America. That's next.
The NFL draft in April showed so many people from around the U.S. just how wonderful Pittsburgh is. The skyline, the bridges, the view from center field. So many guests told us that they were pleasantly surprised with just how beautiful our city is. And so with that added attention and all the medical and technical advances here, how is Pittsburgh looking for the next 250 years?
Channel 11's Rick Earl took to the streets with Mayor Corey O'Connor.
What does the next 250 years look like for Pittsburgh?
Well, will there be flying cars at that point? Hopefully a couple Super Bowls and some World Series, some Stanley Cups. That would be great.
Walking through a Squirrel Hill neighborhood, Mayor Corey O'Connor expressing hopes and dreams for the future of Pittsburgh as the country celebrates 250 years.
Planning the future, though, cleaning out sites so that they're shovel ready for new housing and new Pittsburgh residents. You know, investing in our parks and playgrounds and in our youth. You know, that's really where the future is.
During the past 2.5 centuries, Pittsburgh has evolved from the gateway to the west to the Steel City to eds and meds and now AI and robotics.
Pittsburgh's cutting edge on a lot of these things, and I think that's why we want to tell the story of the talent that's here and what they're producing, but what it's also going to produce for our residents. Every time there's a new robotics company, when those companies open up, that opens up opportunities for jobs for our residents.
Jobs and opportunities the mayor believes will ultimately improve the quality of life.
You just want to make this a better place for people to live and raise families and work.
I mean, that's what it's all about. That's the job of the mayor.
And on this day in Squirrel Hill, O'Connor stopping to talk to the faces of the future.
How are you? Nice to see you. You want to say anything to TV? Come on, tell us about Pittsburgh. Want to come on? Are you loud? Here.
What do you think about Pittsburgh?
It's fine.
Oh, no, it's good. It's good. It's good.
After a few minutes, O'Connor realizes he knows their family.
I grew up with their dad and I played Little League with their uncles. And that's the next Pittsburgh generation. And we want them to be living in a walkable city where you can walk to the playgrounds, you can walk to school. You know, all of those things build the next generation of Pittsburghers. And that's our approach, is what are we doing for families in Pittsburgh every day? Because that's how you grow and that's how you tell the new Pittsburgh story 250 years from now.
And after the exposure from the NFL draft and some other lofty national rankings, O'Connor, despite the city's recent financial struggles, is optimistic about the future.
The whole world's looking at Pittsburgh after the NFL draft, and then, you know, to be voted #1 for July 4th by USA Today is amazing. And then you also see every top 10 list people are sending me. Top 10 place to live, top 10 place to raise a family. I mean, we got to continue to build off that momentum.
And if that future includes flying cars, at least one thing is certain.
And if we have flying cars, we don't have to worry about potholes.
Oh, that would be a nice treat. I fully support flying cars, because then there will be no potholes.
In Squirrel Hill, Rick Earl, Channel 11 News.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you learned a little throughout the hour.
Yeah, what a beautiful and interesting city that we all get to live in and enjoy, and thanks so much for counting on Channel 11.